Hello and welcome to part one of this two-part video. We're now 10 years on from the death of the legendary heavy metal singer Ronnie James Dio. That's a name that should be familiar to everyone who likes hard rock or heavy metal. But to give you a bit of a background on the guy, he's about 5 foot nothing and probably weighs about 7 stone wet through. But to hear him sing, you'd think that he was over 6 foot and built like a brick shithouse. That's how he got himself the legendary name that he did, because of his powerful voice. And the various different and legendary bands that he sung with throughout his career. And I'm going to go through the works on those records that he released through these videos. This part one is going to be his works between 1975 and the end of the 80s. And part two will be from 1990 until his death in 2010. So, let's go on to the first piece of work that he did. And while he was singing for country rock bands in the 60s, he would get his first break with hard rock when Ritchie Blackmore broke from Deep Purple. That's a name that should be familiar to all of you. And he was looking for members to form a new band called Rainbow. And what he did is he picked up all the members from an American band called Elf, where Dio was the singer of. And this would give him his first release, which would be this, in 1975. Now, I would describe this best as a very hit and miss album. It doesn't really know what it wants to be. It's certainly very diverse. But because of that, some tracks are very good and some are not so good, in my opinion. But that would be to be expected, because certainly the sound of Elf would keep coming back in this. You know what I mean? It would be a bit of a throwback to that band somewhat. And I'm going to rate these out of 10. Probably I would describe that one as being a 6. This is just my personal opinion, by the way, and it's not to be taken literally. And I will link all these. Well, not link them out, I will list all these albums that I'm talking about here in the description box. And the best way for you to listen to them for yourself is to just put them in the YouTube search. And you will probably be able to find them, and you can listen to them all in your own time. But then you might think that we're off to a rather slow start here. Yes, we were. But things were to improve very quickly and to a very serious degree. Because in 1976 would come this one. And this is probably the most legendary hard rock album on the planet, in my opinion. It's so good, I've even got the t-shirt, look. But what you see here is new blood coming into the band, where old guys were out of it and new guys came in, where two of them would become legendary in their own right later on. That's Jimmy Bain on the bass and Cozy Powell on the drums. Now, this album here is very much a case of two halves. The first half is 4 tracks of normal length song, and the second half is 2 8-minute ones. It's only 6 tracks long and 33 minutes, but it's certainly quality over quantity here. Now, 8-minute tracks and above, I often find that they don't always justify the duration. That's not the case with these. And certainly the final track in particular, the 8-minute A Light in the Black, that's its title. And that track just has to be heard to be believed. It's basically non-stop action from the word go through its 8-minute duration. And the guitar solo in the middle, Ritchie Blackmore, actually has to be heard to be believed. It'll actually blow your mind, man, I'm telling you. This, if you don't have this album in your collection, I suggest you rectify that situation immediately before you become a laughingstock. Mark out of 10, well, you've probably guessed. Without a doubt, it's a stone cold 10, an absolute classic. Now, how do you beat perfection? Well, the question is, you don't. What you do is you release something equally as good. And in 1978 would be the final album with Rainbow that Dio sang on, which is this one. And the first thing that hits me here is, put some effort into the cover art, guys. What the hell is this shit? But cover art doesn't bring home the bacon, does it? And what you get here is you get a 40-minute album. This one, it's a longer album, And 70 out of the 8 tracks, again, are pure classics. There's a song on there called Gates of Babylon, which actually has to be heard to be believed. An absolute classic of a track. Responsible for influencing, that particular track, I believe, is responsible for influencing a certain Mr. Malmsteen on the guitar. And the only drawback with that, apart from the cover art, of course, is perhaps the last track, which I would describe as 7 minutes of pure boredom. Now, depending on your view on songs like that, you can have a listen to it and you'll understand what I mean. This is just my opinion, but certainly the other 7 tracks on there, again, total classics. And mark out of 10, once again, we're talking about a stone cold 10. And then in a rather shock move that Dio split with Rainbow then, and he teamed up with Black Sabbath, another legendary heavy metal band. Now, I'm going to commit the ultimate sin here amongst heavy metalers, and I'm going to admit, I do not like Black Sabbath. Yes, you heard me correctly. When I say that, I'm talking about the works that they did in the 70s with Ozzy Osbourne. I was never a fan of their stuff, always too sluggish. But for some reason, whenever Ronnie James Dio takes up the mic in Black Sabbath, they become a great band. I don't know how it happens. I can only assume it must be down to Dio himself, because he wasn't just a singer in Black Sabbath, he was actually a major part of the songwriting too. And the first fruit of this collaboration would be this one in 1980, which is basically the old Black Sabbath lineup with Ronnie James Dio replacing Ozzy Osbourne. And I would describe it as, it's a great record. Certainly doesn't sound anything like the Black Sabbath that you will be familiar with in the 70s. It's a bit more upbeat, a bit more lively, a bit more commercial even. But Dio on there, it just sounds his great self, just like he did in Rainbow. It's almost like he's singing for a different version of Rainbow. It's probably a little bit more like Rainbow than it is like Black Sabbath, if I'm honest. But there you go. Mark out of 10. I'd probably plump for an 8 on that. It's not a stone cold classic, but it's damn good nonetheless. 1 year later, in 1981, we'll come out with this one. That's the second of the 2 Black Sabbath albums with Dio. I'd say very much it's a case of copy and paste what I've just said for the previous one. The sound on there is perhaps a little bit more diverse. There's a little bit more light and shade in there, you could say. Again, mark out of 10. I'm going to go for an 8 because it's equally as good as its predecessor. Now, the only thing about that one is that the drummer is the original Black Sabbath drummer was replaced by a guy called Vinny Appice. Now, apologies if I pronounced his surname wrong, but I will refer to him in these videos from this point on as Vinny the drummer. And he will become a major part of Dio's work later on. And after being fired from Black Sabbath because he was accused of messing with the mixing in the studio, he decided to form a new band under his own name. But it wasn't exactly a new band, because what he did is he took the bass player from Rainbow, Jimmy Bain, and he took Vinny the drummer and a new guitarist called Vivian Campbell and formed a new band under his own name, just referring to it as Dio. And that would be what his career would become for the most part from this point on. And the first fruits of that new outfit would be this. And once again, this is an absolute legendary stone cold classic. It's quite a heavy record. It's a little bit heavier than his previous stuff. I would say that music-wise, it takes bits of his times with Rainbow, bits of his times with Black Sabbath, as perhaps to be expected. But it puts it through a filter that cleans up, irons out all the ups and downs, and it's a perfect record. The only thing I would have to say about this one is the production on it. The production on this is perhaps lacking bass. It's a little bit top heavy. But that doesn't detract from the great music on offer here. And once again, mark out of 10, I would say it's a stone cold 10. No question about it. 1 year later, in 1984, would be Dio album number 2, which is this one here. And if you look at the front cover, we see that same band mascot being there. It's a bit like Dio's equivalent of Eddie. You know, Iron Maiden's Eddie. It's a bit like Dio's equivalent of that. Once again, we're seeing a fantastic piece of work here with this. the production of the lack of bass on the first Dio album has been ironed out here, and there's certainly a bit more bass to be heard. If you put it on back to back with its previous one, you'll hear it straight away. Again, I'd say very much same sort of thing as the one before it. Nothing different, just more of the same fantastic music on offer. Mark out of 10, it's a stone cold 10 once again. Then 1 year later in 1985 would come this one, where this one takes on a slightly more hard rock sound rather than a heavy metal sound, a little bit more flirting with commercial sounds of the 80s. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I would have to describe this one as not quite a classic. It's great nonetheless, but it's not quite a classic, not as good as its previous two. So mark out a 10 for this. I would probably plump for a 9 there on that one. And then the final album from the 80s would be this one, where the band mascot is reactivated again there. This came out in 1987. And what you see with this one is guitarist Vivian Campbell has left, and in comes a guy called Craig Goldie. The rest of the guys are all the same. This one is kind of a throwback. It's kind of kicks into the curb the hard rock commercialism of Sacred Heart. And this one is more of a metal sound. But unfortunately, it doesn't quite match the first two albums on offer. So I will probably have to give this one a 9 as a mark out of 10, because it is a brilliant piece of work, but not quite a stone cold classic. Okay, so that brings us to a good break-off point where I'll now move into part 2, where we went into the 90s and things were to start taking a few surprising turns. Not all of those turns were good. Some were pretty awful, in fact, but some were quite surprisingly good. So, join me in part 2, and we'll start the works from 1990 onwards to his death in 2010. Please stay tuned. Join me back to follow. Bye for now.